Okay, so a little bit on plie technique. Plie means to bend, like the word pliable or pliers. We have two different plies, a demi plie, which is a half a plie, and a grand plie, which is the big one. Plie is done in every ballet position, first, second, third, fourth, fifth, and if you're picky about it, sixth. It makes your movements look fluid, the same way you need to bend your knees when you walk. It acts as a springboard before and after your jumps. It helps you look fluid. Every dance form has its own form of plie. Unfortunately for us, a plie is a whole lot more work than simply bending your knees. You got to involve the whole rest of the body. Keep everything lifted up, but still keep your shoulders down, and tuck in your tummy and keep your rib cage closed. And you got to turn out and make sure your knees are lined up with your toes, and don't let your butt stick out. If you're viewing a plie from the side, you should appear very flat, but sticking your butt out is actually one of the most common mistakes, so we're going to go over how to kind of fight this mistake. One of the first things you can do is lay flat on your back and imagine that you're pushing your lower back into the floor. Now, it's not going to stay all the way to the floor all the time because you got some butt muscles in the way, and we all have a natural curve in our lower spine. But the more you fight for that feeling, the flatter you'll be when you're doing your plie standing up. Alternatively, you can do the same thing laying on your belly, but again, you've got to be super careful to be flat on the floor. Don't let your butt pop up. I actually want you to imagine that you're sandwiched between two pieces of bread. You have to feel like you're very flat in your hips and your knees whenever you do a plie. And you can do that by strengthening your turnout muscles. And one way to do this is to lay on your back and do a fourth position plie with your feet in the air, but you have to keep your feet parallel. It's easy to turn out when you bend your knees, but try to maintain it while you straighten. You're going to feel that like burning, warm sensation in your thighs. Try to keep your knees and your toes facing away from each other the whole time. This is actually harder than it looks. You can do this same exercise in fifth position. This is really tough, but you're going to get really strong turnout muscles. And you have to imagine that all your muscles are turning out, not just your thighs, but your calves too. Because when you're standing up, you can't just rely on your hips and ankles to do everything. Your turnout is what helps keep your knees over your toes when you do a plie. This is what helps keep you very flat. Remember, I told you to imagine that you're sandwiched between two pieces of bread. So in a demi-plie, your heels stay on the floor, but you don't sit in your heels. You should still have some weight in the balls of your feet. Your weight is evenly distributed between your legs. Don't favor one leg over the other. Your heels come up for a grand plie, but they should come up at the last possible moment. Your grand plie should be smooth and fluid and stretchy. Don't pop your heels up before you go down. Heels come up at the last moment. And also don't just like squat down or pop down or sit in your grand plie. There should always be a little bit of tension. You should always feel your legs working. Second position is the exception. You can keep your heels down. Your feet are traditionally 1 foot length apart, but as demands change in ballet, for example, we prepare for bigger jumps, you can make your second position wider. All children and all beginners will have the habit of sticking their butt out in the beginning, but do not do this. Imagine that your tailbone is pointing down to the floor and your belly is going in and up, like your diaphragm is lifting up. And this whole time, remember, sandwich your hips and sandwich your thighs open so flat that if you look at yourself in the mirror, you should look like a thin little tomato slice getting ready to be sandwiched between two pieces of bread. I actually think fourth position is the hardest because your body feels like it wants to twist towards the back leg. A way to help you prevent doing this is to imagine your hips are like lights on a car. Always keep your headlights forward. Like second position, your fourth position is as wide as 1 foot length apart. But if you're preparing for a turn, you can widen your fourth a little bit. It is especially important to imagine your calves and all your other muscles are turning out too. You have to pay extra attention to the back knee because it's very common for the back knee to turn in, but you gotta fight really hard to keep it turned out. I think fifth position is actually a little bit easier. To me, it almost feels like first position. I don't have to worry about my feet being far apart or my hips twisting like they did in fourth position. Little side note, if you've got bigger thighs like me that seem to get in the way, You can let the front knee bend slightly so that you can cross your feet all the way. It's more important to have your feet crossed in a deep fifth position than to have your knees completely straight. You can release the front knee in your fifth position. And finally, the arms move in tandem with your plie. For example, your first plie usually starts with an allongé, and your arm reaches the lowest point when you finish the plie. For your second plie, the arm typically opens when it finishes, and for your grand plie, you start with an allongé again, and your arm usually reaches its lowest point when you're at the bottom of your plie. There are always different permutations and different ways to do your arms. It mostly depends on what your teacher or the choreographer wants.